A $1,500 motorcycle was never supposed to embarrass the machines Americans were told to admire. But it does, because it proves a brutal point. A bike does not need to be massive, expensive, overbuilt, or packed with electronics to be serious. It needs to run. It needs to survive. It needs to carry a rider through bad roads, tight money, skipped maintenance, and real life without turning every problem into a dealer visit. That is the kind of value the American market stopped respecting. And maybe that is the real warning here. The cheap bike may not be the compromise. The expensive one might be. So watch till the end, because once you see why this motorcycle was never taken seriously here, you may never look at American bike prices the same way again. What's happening? There's a motorcycle out there, cheaper than most service bills, and it runs whole regions without complaining. It is not rare, not experimental, and not built for showroom bragging. It has spent decades moving people, hauling goods, and starting every morning like a machine is supposed to. The strange part is you almost never see that kind of bike here. It was never pushed, never positioned, never treated like something American riders should take seriously. The closest clue is the Honda Navi, and even that confused people. Too small to brag about, too simple to look premium, too honest to justify a bigger price. But outside this market, machines like that are not novelties. They are tools. They get people to work, bring groceries home, and keep small businesses alive. So the real question is not whether simple bikes are good enough. It is why America was never offered them. That question starts to make more sense when you look at what riders were told to want. When better started, meaning bigger. Somewhere along the way, better stopped meaning reliable, and started meaning bigger. Bigger engines, bigger frames, bigger expectations. It didn't happen overnight. It crept in slowly, one model year at a time, one upgrade at a time, until more power and more features became the standard people measured everything against. It sounded right on paper, and it looked even better in a showroom. You remember when bikes didn't need to prove themselves like that. They just worked, they started, they ran, and they got you where you needed to go. But over time, performance numbers started carrying more weight than real-world use. Horsepower became a selling point instead of just a byproduct. Comfort turned into a checklist. Technology filled in every gap until riding itself started feeling different. It wasn't just the machines. It was the expectation built around them. Riders began looking for something more than function, something that felt like an upgrade, something that justified the cost, something that looked the part even when it wasn't being ridden. That shift didn't come from nowhere. It was built, marketed, and reinforced until it became normal. On the surface, it made sense. More features should mean more value. More power should mean more capability. But that definition only works if you ignore how motorcycles are actually used in most of the world. Because outside this bubble, the idea of better looks very different. A different definition of better leads to a completely different kind of machine. If this is already lining up with what you've seen out on the road, hit like, subscribe, and add your take below. It helps more real riders find this and keeps conversations like this honest, grounded, and worth having today. The kind of bike that doesn't care about neglect. There's a reason certain motorcycles keep showing up in places where conditions aren't ideal and maintenance isn't guaranteed. They're not built for perfect situations. They're built for the opposite. The kind of riding where oil changes get skipped, where dust finds its way into everything, where weight limits are more of a suggestion than a rule. That's not poor design. That's the environment they were meant to survive. The Honda CG125 came from that mindset. Not built to impress, not built to chase numbers, but built with one assumption. It's going to be used hard, and it's not always going to be taken care of. Everything about it reflects that. Simple layout, durable internals, nothing unnecessary. Not because engineers didn't know how to make something more advanced, but because they understood what actually matters when conditions aren't controlled. You've seen that kind of thinking before, machines that aren't flashy but refuse to quit. The kind that don't ask for much and don't give up easily. There's a certain respect that comes with that. Not excitement, not hype, just reliability you can count on without thinking about it. Because when a machine is built to survive anything, it stops being optional. When a motorcycle stops being a toy. In a lot of places, a motorcycle isn't something you take out on weekends. It's something you rely on every day. It's transportation in the most direct sense. No backup plan, no second option sitting in the driveway. If it doesn't start, something important doesn't happen. That changes how people think about what a bike should be. There's no room for unnecessary complexity in that kind of setup. No patience for features that don't serve a purpose. The machine isn't there to entertain. It's there to work, to carry, to move, to deliver, to get someone from one place to another without failing. That's a completely different relationship than what most riders are used to. You don't judge a machine like that by how it feels on a perfect road or how it looks parked outside a shop. You judge it by whether it shows up every time you need it. Whether it handles bad fuel, rough roads, heavy loads, and long days without breaking down. Whether it keeps going when conditions aren't ideal. That gap is where the real story begins to show itself. Numbers that shouldn't exist. Step back from opinion for a second and just look at what's been built. Not thousands, not hundreds of thousands. Tens of millions of motorcycles built off one simple idea, spread across continents, running day after day without ever being treated like something special. That kind of scale doesn't happen because of hype, and it doesn't happen because of marketing. It happens because something works well enough that people keep choosing it again and again without needing to be convinced. In places like Brazil, a single model has dominated registrations for decades. Not because it's exciting, but because it's dependable. In other regions, the same basic platform shows up in different forms, built locally, adapted slightly, but still rooted in the same principle. Reliable transportation that doesn't ask much and doesn't break easily. When one machine quietly becomes the backbone of movement across multiple countries, it stops being just another product and starts becoming part of the system. Compare that to how motorcycles sell here. Fragmented markets, constant updates, shifting trends. One year something is hot. The next year it's forgotten. No single model carries that kind of long-term dominance because the focus isn't on consistency, it's on change, on improvement, on giving people a reason to upgrade. That cycle keeps things moving, but it doesn't build something that lasts across generations. Those numbers don't lie, and they don't show up by accident. They point to something much simpler than most people expect. And once you see it, it's hard to unsee. That kind of consistency only happens when the machine itself refuses to quit. Why simple machines outlast complicated ones? You don't need a breakdown chart to understand why simple machines last longer. You've seen it. Fewer moving parts means fewer things that can fail. No extra systems trying to manage what doesn't need managing. Just basic mechanical function doing exactly what it's supposed to do over and over again without needing constant attention. A lot of modern bikes are built to impress. Smooth power delivery, multiple ride settings, electronic assistance layered on top of mechanical systems. It feels refined, and there's nothing wrong with that. But every added component introduces another point where something can go wrong. Another system that depends on something else, working perfectly. When everything is new, it's seamless. Over time, that complexity starts to show. Simple machines don't rely on that chain of dependencies. They run because the core parts are strong, and the design doesn't leave much room for failure. Air, fuel, spark, motion. Keep those working, and the machine keeps moving. That's the entire philosophy. No extra layers, no hidden complications. Just something built to keep going even when conditions aren't ideal. And that kind of durability starts to matter more when ownership isn't just about riding, it's about keeping something alive. The difference between owning and maintaining. Owning a motorcycle and maintaining one are not the same thing, even though they get treated like they are. Buying is easy. Financing, paperwork, riding it off the lot. That part is straightforward. What happens after that is where the real cost shows up, and it's where the difference between simple and complex becomes impossible to ignore. Machines built around simplicity don't ask much from the person riding them. Basic tools, basic knowledge, and parts that are easy to find. If something goes wrong, it can be fixed without a long wait or a specialized system. That means less downtime, less dependency, and less money spent just keeping the bike on the road. It's not about being cheap. It's about being manageable. Compare that to a setup where every issue requires a visit to a dealer or a diagnostic tool. More time waiting, more money spent, more reliance on systems that are out of reach for most riders. It's not that those bikes are bad. They're built for a different kind of ownership, one where convenience is traded for control, and where the rider becomes less involved in the machine itself. That difference doesn't matter much when everything is working perfectly. It matters when something breaks, when parts are needed, when time and money become factors. That's when ownership turns into maintenance. And that's when the gap between these machines becomes clear. That gap becomes even more obvious when something simple finally shows up in a market that isn't used to it. When simple finally showed up and got ignored. When a small, simple motorcycle finally made its way into the United States, it didn't land the way you might expect. The Honda Navi showed up with a price that made it accessible, a design that stripped things down to the basics, and a purpose that was easy to understand. Lightweight, affordable, easy to use. On paper, it checked a lot of boxes. The reaction was mixed. Some riders appreciated it for what it was. Others didn't quite know what to make of it. It didn't fit into the usual categories. Not powerful enough to compete with larger bikes. Not styled like a traditional cruiser. Not packed with features that justify a higher price. It sat somewhere in between, and that space made it easy to overlook. That hesitation wasn't about the machine failing to deliver. It was about expectations not lining up with what was in front of them. When a market is used to a certain definition of value, anything outside of that feels incomplete, even if it serves a clear purpose. The Navi didn't struggle because it lacked function. It struggled because it didn't match what people thought they should want. Seen from a distance, that moment says more about the market than the motorcycle itself. When something simple shows up and gets questioned instead of understood, it reveals how far expectations have shifted. And once that becomes clear, it's hard not to start questioning the bigger picture. That bigger picture starts to come into focus when you look at how those expectations were built in the first place. A level of dominance no one talks about. Look at how motorcycles usually compete here. Brands fight for attention, models rotate in and out, and nothing really holds the top spot for long without being replaced or redesigned. Now compare that to markets where one platform keeps showing up year after year, barely changing, still leading sales, still doing the same job without needing a reinvention to stay relevant. In several countries, a single model family has carried a massive share of registrations for decades. Not because it was aggressively marketed every season, but because it never stopped working. Production doesn't spike and drop, it stays steady. Supply chains stay focused. Mechanics know exactly what they're dealing with. Parts remain available because nothing fundamentally changes. That kind of stability creates something most markets never achieve: consistency. Here, dominance looks different. It's spread across categories, across brands, across trends that shift depending on what's new or what's promoted. No single machine becomes the standard because the system isn't built to allow that. It rewards change, upgrades, and variety. There's value in that, but it comes at the cost of continuity. The numbers alone are impressive, but they only tell part of the story. The real difference shows up in how these machines are actually used. The stories that never make it. Here, spend time around riders who depend on their motorcycles every day, and you start hearing a different kind of story. Not about upgrades or performance gains, but about distance, time, and consistency. Bikes that run for years without major work. Machines that carry more weight than they were ever meant to, and still come back the next morning ready to go again. These aren't stories you see featured in advertisements or highlighted in reviews. They're the quiet reality of daily use. A rider who uses the same machine for work, for errands, for everything in between. Oil changes when possible, basic care when time allows, and still the bike holds together. Not perfect, not polished, but dependable in a way that matters. There's no sense of ownership in the way it's usually described here. No attachment to upgrades, no constant tweaking, no cycle of replacing one model with another. The machine is there to serve a purpose, and as long as it fulfills that purpose, it stays in use. When something wears out, it gets fixed. When it keeps running, it keeps working. That kind of relationship changes how a motorcycle is valued. It's not about how it feels on a perfect road, or how it compares to something newer. It's about whether it continues to perform under pressure. Over time, that kind of use builds a different standard, one that doesn't rely on perception or preference. That standard highlights a gap that doesn't get discussed very often, even though it affects every rider eventually. If this breakdown gave you something real to think about, subscribe now. More videos like this are coming, focused on what actually matters in the garage and on the road, without hype, without noise, and without wasting your time. The ownership gap. No one admits. There's a difference between owning a motorcycle in a system built around independence and owning one in a system built around support. In one case, the rider handles most of the upkeep. Parts are easy to find, repairs are straightforward, and the machine is designed with that in mind. In the other, the process leans heavily on dealers, specialized tools, and structured maintenance schedules. Neither approach is wrong, but they lead to very different experiences. In markets where simplicity is the priority, riders are used to handling problems themselves. A breakdown doesn't stop everything. It becomes a repair, often done quickly, often without much cost. That keeps the machine in use and keeps the rider moving. In a more structured system, maintenance becomes a process. Scheduled visits, diagnostic checks, parts that aren't always immediately available. It works well when everything is accessible. But it introduces delays and costs that aren't always visible at the point of purchase. Over time, those factors add up, and they shape how long a bike stays in service. The gap isn't just about cost. It's about control. One setup keeps the rider closely connected to the machine, while the other creates distance between the two. That distance can make ownership easier in some ways, but it also reduces flexibility when something goes wrong. Looking at that difference makes it easier to understand what really matters once everything unnecessary is taken away. When you strip a motorcycle down to the basics, take away everything that isn't essential and see what remains. No added comfort beyond what's needed to ride. No extra power beyond what moves the machine reliably. No technology layered on top to smooth out the experience. What you're left with is the core function. A machine that starts, moves, and keeps going. It's a simple test, but it changes perspective. When all the extras are removed, the question becomes clearer. Does the motorcycle do what it's supposed to do consistently without requiring constant attention or adjustment? If the answer is yes, then everything else becomes optional rather than necessary. That doesn't mean comfort or performance don't matter. They do, especially in certain types of riding. Long distances, higher speeds, specific conditions all benefit from added capability. But when those features become the baseline expectation, it shifts the focus away from what keeps the machine dependable in the first place. That realization leads to a final question that doesn't sit comfortably once it's asked. If the basics are enough, why are most riders choosing something else? What changes when money gets tight? When costs start creeping up, the way people look at their machines begins to shift. Fuel gets more expensive, parts don't stay cheap, and even routine maintenance starts feeling heavier than it used to. That's when the difference between what someone wants and what they can afford becomes harder to ignore. A bike that once felt like a good idea starts to look like a commitment that needs to be justified. You see it in small decisions first. Riding less often, stretching service intervals, putting off repairs that would have been handled immediately before. Over time, those small changes add up. The machine doesn't change, but the way it fits into daily life does. It stops being something taken for granted and starts becoming something that needs to earn its place. That pressure pushes priorities in a different direction. Reliability starts to matter more than performance. Ease of maintenance becomes more valuable than added features. A machine that can be kept running without a lot of cost or effort begins to make more sense than one that demands attention every time something goes wrong. It's not a dramatic shift, but it's a real one. Pressure like that reveals something important about how different systems are built to handle change. Why some markets handle it better. In places where motorcycles have always been treated as essential tools, the systems around them are built differently. Parts are easier to find, often available in small shops rather than centralized locations. Repairs don't require specialized equipment or long waits. The entire ecosystem supports keeping machines running with minimal interruption, because that's what people rely on every day. That kind of setup doesn't appear overnight. It develops over time, shaped by necessity. When a large portion of the population depends on simple, durable machines, everything around those machines evolves to support them. Mechanics become familiar with the designs, suppliers keep components in circulation, and riders learn how to handle basic issues themselves. Here, the structure is different. Support exists, but it's more centralized, more dependent on specific channels. That works well when everything is functioning smoothly, but it introduces friction when conditions change. Parts take longer to arrive, service becomes more expensive, and the process of keeping a bike on the road becomes more involved than it needs to be. It's not a matter of one system being better than the other. They were built for different expectations. One assumes constant use under unpredictable conditions. The other assumes a level of stability that allows for more complexity. When those assumptions no longer hold, the differences between them become more visible. Those differences start to matter as riders quietly begin to rethink what kind of machines make sense moving forward. The quiet return of simplicity. There's a subtle shift happening, and it doesn't come with a lot of noise. It shows up in small ways. Riders looking at older machines again, not for nostalgia, but for practicality. Interest in smaller, simpler bikes starting to rise, not because they're exciting, but because they're manageable. The used market reflecting those changes, with certain models holding their value in ways that weren't expected. It's not a widespread movement, and it's not being pushed aggressively. It's happening gradually, almost in the background. People adjusting their expectations without making a big statement about it. Choosing something that makes sense for their situation instead of chasing something that doesn't. That kind of change doesn't happen all at once. It takes time for habits to shift, for perceptions to catch up with reality. Even when the benefits of simplicity are clear, the idea of stepping away from what's familiar isn't always easy. There's a comfort in sticking with what's known, even if it's not the most practical choice anymore. Even with that shift underway, there's still one piece that doesn't fall into place as easily as the rest. The difference between wanting and needing. At the center of all of this is a simple distinction that doesn't always get acknowledged. What a rider wants and what a rider needs are not the same thing. One is shaped by preference, by experience, by the way a machine feels, and what it represents. The other is defined by function, by reliability, by whether it does the job without creating new problems. Most motorcycles sold today are built around what people want. There's nothing inherently wrong with that. Riding has always had an emotional side to it. The sound, the feel, the presence of a machine that matches a certain idea of what riding should be. That connection matters, and it's part of what draws people to motorcycles in the first place. The challenge comes when those wants are treated as needs. When complexity becomes the baseline instead of an option. When the expectation shifts so far that a simple machine feels incomplete, even if it covers everything required to ride. That's where the gap widens And it's where decisions start to carry more weight than they appear to on the surface. And once that recognition settles in, it's hard to look at the market the same way again. A $1,500 motorcycle should not make the whole market look confused, but that is exactly what this one does. It reminds us that real value is not always bigger, louder, heavier, or more expensive. Sometimes it is the machine that starts, runs, survives, and keeps doing the job without turning the rider into a customer for life. And maybe that is what American riders need to question more often. What do you think? Have we been sold the wrong idea of what a real motorcycle should be? Comment below, hit like if this made sense, and subscribe for more honest motorcycle breakdowns.